Great to meet you, Kathy.
Nice to meet you too.
We've been chatting away backstage. You have such interesting takes on what's happening in the world and what your foundation is doing now. But let's start with that. You're about adaptation immediately.
Right now.
For the people right now
Right
who
now.
are seeing climate change actually blister their hands. Tell us about that.
Well, some of the folks who are here were in earlier conversations that heard about women, and it's not just women in India, it's women working in the informal sector in really hot places and deeply in poverty, are experiencing extreme heat and climate extremes physically and with blisters on their hands. And you can think of it as they're literally bearing the burden of climate change in their hands when they have contributed nothing to the effects of climate change and are it's just not fair. I mean, that's easily seen. Yeah.
And you've set up a program of insurance, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
How does it work?
So the idea is that it's too hot to work, and that heat affects the health of women. It affects the health of everybody, but it's disproportionately burdening women physiologically, culturally, the clothes that we wear, the responsibilities we have culturally. And so when it's so hot that their bodies break down, we are providing an insurance that goes directly to their bank account. And this next round of the insurance will be a forecast-based product. That means they get paid before the heat wave comes. And so that means they can make decisions about, I'm going to change my schedule for the day, I'm going to do something different with my meals or with my kids. And so it lets them have more choice, and it saves their health, and that protects their income, and that is the most important thing to them.
The foresight piece of this is so intriguing to me, because right now we live in a very reactionary disaster response mindset.
Yeah.
Where a lot of people have to die before anybody wakes up and takes action. I think COVID was a primer on that.
Yeah.
And the societies that care for each other the most are the ones that get through pandemics or these unnatural disasters. How does that piece fit in? Because I was just reading some intriguing stuff about the idea that AI, when it comes to climate, especially forecasting, could be hugely powerful to give us a heads up.
Yeah.
But this is a switch sociologically, psychologically, so talk us through that.
Well, what's interesting about this particular group, they are the Self-Employed Women's Association, and there are 2.6 million women in this group. And there are other, SEWA is the acronym, SEWA. SEWA-like organizations exist all over the global South. And they're networked with grassroots leaders who came up through doing some of the trades that make up the trade union. And their connectivity and their support for each other makes this group of women incredibly resilient. They are, the things that they are withstanding, I mean, a heat wave on top of a cyclone, this was just last week, and still providing all of the things that the family needs, and oftentimes they're the primary breadwinners. Their social cohesion, their network of support that they have, it's a mutual insurance company even. They've got access to credit and childcare and healthcare. But as I told you backstage, the number one thing pushing them back into poverty is climate impacts, heat and flood.
Right,
yeah.
right. So part of your initiatives too, though, is awareness, and so naming heat waves, the way we name hurricanes.
Yeah.
This is taking off, this idea?
Yeah, so this is exciting. Today is the day that the world's second heat wave has been officially named in Seville, and Yago, Y-A-G-O, you'll soon read about this. Yago came to be in the middle of the night while we were sleeping. It seems there's some cognitive dissonance, and I'm smiling about it because the reason we're naming it is because it's so incredibly deadly, and that means an up to a 30% increase in all-cause mortality for Seville. And so there's nothing fun about it, but what makes me smile is that we now have evidence that naming a heat wave, we named heat wave Zoe last year in Seville, it had immense power, and it got people to change their behavior, call their neighbors, and take the advice of the government more than they would have if it didn't have a name. And so now we're adding to the evidence base that says this works. This invisible silent threat can have a brand, and when you give it a name, it gets a persona, and you use all the PR tools that we have, and people say, hey, this thing's serious, I'm gonna change what I'm doing today.
The big heat dome in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
In fact, interesting, the county, or I think around Seattle, just filed a lawsuit. They're suing the big oil companies and the American Petroleum Institute. So that's a new climate attribution chapter to the legal aspect of
New
this.
twist.
But that was pretty well predicted.
Yeah.
But the word just didn't get out in a way that could save 1,500 lives.
Yes, and we also talked about this. I mean, our predictive capabilities have never been better. Our ability to model the climate impacts is incredibly sophisticated, but yet, a double negative, but yet, we still had those deaths. And so this is the thing about the human brain, is we're just so feeble. We see these big things. We're having the hardest time comprehending how big and how ubiquitous climate effects are. And yet we are so good at adapting. And in this case, with all of that predictive capability, we still had all of that death. And it's because the buildings aren't made for the temperatures, the clothes we wear in the Pacific Northwest aren't ready for 118 degrees, whatever the top temperature was. The way we live, the not air conditioned, even just the mindset. You know, I lived and worked in Florida for more than 2 decades, and there's a culture of preparedness and preparation around hurricanes. I know exactly what a hurricane, Category 3, I know what to do. I know what kind of preparation. I know that people are going to stay home from work. I know that there's going to be evacuation orders. And so we need the same kind of preparation and cultural shift on extreme heat and other hazards too, but for us that's the silent deadly one that needs the most attention.
Do you think that part of our hardwiring is we need to taste this brutal pain in order to act? Because we also have a tendency to normalize the awful, the horrible. And what was headline grabbing in the early parts of the pandemic became blasé towards the end, and it's constantly shifting. And so just the idea that heat dome created a temperature in Seattle that is yet to be recorded in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And the UK went through the same sort of thing.
They did. They lost 2,500 people
because they're living in a world that was built in a literally different world.
Yeah.
And so to make that connection, at what point do you think the masses, a critical mass, will connect this with the social license that is given to oil companies?
Yeah, I wanted to note, we just had 2 sessions that talked a lot about the COP, and I wanted to note that the name tags of the COP participants will now say, I am connected to the oil and gas industry. And so there will be a mark on the name tag. So just given the notion that the social license is changing, and the motion of young climate activists and the use of social media and the way that communities are coming together, if you think about the official negotiations of the UNFCCC, the climate convention, all of this stuff is moving around it. All of these institutions that are so slow, and it's getting in front of them. And I think that means the social license has eroded for oil and gas to a point that it's hard to see how we continue. Now, their level of insidiousness, disinformation, their evil doing through chambers of commerce and all of the science they're funding that's bogus. I mean, that's it's intense. I mean, I think we're going to have to call it what it is. And I think having that name tag that says I'm associated with the industry is going to be very helpful just for transparency. Yeah. But the question you asked is, I think was it about social license? How bad does it have to get before we change?
The thing I get, when I've done stories on pipeline protests, and the one recently up in Minnesota I went up to cover, somebody from the union, the pipe fitters union, said, look, my guys will take jobs wherever you guys want to build wind turbines?
Yeah, love to.
We'll take the jobs.
Yeah.
But nobody's picketing a gas station.
Yeah.
Nobody is out there protesting, while they fill up their SUV.
Yeah.
So that we're so entrenched. Petrochemicals built everything that in our spaces. Yeah. And as a previous guest said, there's good people stuck in bad systems.
Yes.
And so when I feel compelled to say, how do you live with yourself?
Yeah.
How do you look in the mirror when you know that the business model is destructive? Is not effective.
Yeah, right.
So, what is...
Well, people need alternatives. I mean, people need a job.
Exactly, yeah.
People need a job. it's mind-boggling how massive the efforts of the oil and gas industry have been to make sure that that you're not going to protest that it's harder for you to buy an electric car, that you create a uncertainty around the electric cars and saying, they only have this much range. I think I saw something about range anxiety in the news. And if we pump up uncertainty and doubt, we're subsidizing it with our taxpayer dollars. I mean, we're still subsidizing the oil and gas industry. So we've got a lot of work to do. But I wanted to get to the point you said, how bad does it have to get before something happens? And I think sometimes that it is discouraging because really terrible things happen. 1,200 people died. Lots of people don't even know that. Lots of people have no idea that 1,200 people died in a heat wave that was 2 days. And an aerial photograph of the area from one day to the next, it's not like a hurricane or a flood. I mean, it just looks just the same. And so people are like, what? 20, that's a mass casualty event. How did that happen? And does change happen? But I think, Lisa just made the point that we finally have the loss and damage facility that was approved at the COP in Egypt. And it happened because a third of Pakistan was underwater. Right. And the climate minister, Sherry Rahman of Pakistan, leaned in 120% to show, please don't let this be in vain. Please let the fact that so many people of Pakistan suffered, and please don't let that go to waste. And that was successful. And so I think there's a mixed answer to how bad does it have to get for us to do it. And then you said that's not working. We don't have people aren't responding to the negative. And so, we were backstage saying it's urgent. People are dying, blisters on hands. I mean, and people are having lots of nice conversations. Like, when do we feel the urgency? And if the doom and gloom doesn't work, what's going to work? And there's so many good things happening. I mean, many of you saw that the energy supply for renewables was more than fossil fuel energy in the EU for the first time. I think it was yesterday, it could have been last week, but we saw that news. I mean, that's fantastic. There are a lot of good things happening, but we still have to be real about how bad it is. And I think we even touched on migration. We won't have time for all of the issues, I know.
Yeah. I mean, I think about it in terms of, when I first met Jeff Goodell from Rolling Stone, who's going to be here earlier, we were working on an hour special that I called The Road to Change, that was basically when you realize that, for better or worse, the earth we grew up on is gone. And the new one, we don't know how it's going to work either way, but you have to process that loss.
Yeah.
And so the framing device became a road trip through the 5 stages of grief. And there are big stretches of denial in parts of the country. Places like Miami and Charleston are bargaining. They think we can bargain, we can build seawalls, we can raise our streets, we can engineer around this. A lot of people are in the depression or anger phases, depending on where they are. And so you kind of have to meet whoever you're talking to where they are in that stage of grief. And it's not until acceptance that we can really, say, okay, this is the reality we've built for ourselves in India. We need to get these women some gloves.
Yeah.
But then it comes down to the discussion about, once you come into acceptance, how do you spend your time? And people ask me a lot, like, what do I do? And there's that quote about climate change will demands 3 things of us: mitigation, adaptation, and pain. And the share of each one of those things depends on how much we put into the first one.
Yeah.
It feels like you're doing a lot of adaptation work. Is that the focus? Do you also think about mitigating and stopping the flow of oil?
We're a relatively small NGO, so there's so many organizations focused on mitigation and an energy transition that we feel like our best, and also for so long, those, and even to today, mitigation foundations, philanthropy companies felt like and the banking industry too, if we talk about resilience and adaptation and we start to fund it, we're giving up. We're acknowledging we're not getting this done. And so we've made so many commitments, we're all in, we've spent billions of dollars for this transition. We can't go over here and do adaptation. And so just out of fairness, and also this is an economic imperative. I mean, I think I mentioned that extreme heat cost the US economy $100 billion just in worker productivity losses alone.
Right.
And of course, it's disproportionate impact. 18% of that loss is borne by Black and Hispanic workers in the South. And so it's an economic piece. We had $10 billion in losses of the worker productivity in Miami-Dade County, and the budget for the entire year for Miami-Dade County is $10 billion. So their entire budget is evaporating for something that they can't see. And so we feel like we've got to create the intelligence that the world will need. I mean, it's just practical. It's super practical.
Exactly.
And so we're at the systems level. We're working with the UNFCCC and creating a campaign around the race to resilience to get people thinking about. We helped create the first human-based metric for climate progress. We've always talked about dollars deployed and metric tons of carbon not emitted or stored. This is the first time. This was in Glasgow. Again, Lisa said cities. Yeah, this was COP26.
Right.
UK hosted that. We launched the Race to Resilience with the climate champions that we're going to reach 4 billion people with resilient solutions. So let's talk about human beings in climate. And then now this year, climate and health is coming in. So the World Health Organization is going to have a big pavilion at COP, and we're going to be talking about climate and health. And so we are making progress. We are expanding the arguments. And now we talk about a just transition. You can put anything you want into that. That's a big bucket of stuff. You can. Right. That's nature-based solutions. That's gender. That's development. That's development finance. I mean, you can call that whatever you want. But the just transition sort of captures it. So we're in a hurry. Yeah, we got to hustle, and we got to work to protect people right now, and we have to move systems. And we got to call BS where BS is, and put money on people because they need jobs, they need choice, they have agency. And we know what to do. I mean, we have the science, the policy, the money. We got some people working against us, and we'll take them on separately.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, one bit of parenting advice that I stole from Mr. Rogers: when things get really rough and you're watching really disturbing things on TV, look for the helpers.
Yes.
And
it's great.
I get my inspiration from meeting helpers like you,
Thank you.
Who are head on into this fight. Thank you for your time and your work.
Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you. Thank you.